Hi everyone, this is the overview for Chapter 11. A little bit briefer than the others, but we'll go ahead and get started. There we go. Okay, so first off, let's take a look at, well, obviously this focuses on work and the economy. And so if we're thinking about the economy in the United States, we have what most people would call capitalism. And while that may be how we think of the United States, we'll see that it's not necessarily as true as it might have once been. First off, capitalism, as you all know, is focused on these major ideas of, well, I would say three major ideas. One, of course, let me move this up here. One is we've got to maximize our profit. Two, we think freedom of competition is good. At least it's good for the consumer. It means that prices are lower when there are lots of people offering something for sale versus when there's only one provider. As you've often found, well, as you probably found out if you've gone to a Dodger game, a Laker game, a concert, everything costs more inside the venue than if you went outside the venue. Also, when it comes to maximizing our profit, my guess is that most of you are earning a degree because you recognize that hopefully the degree will help you to maximize your own profit, meaning you'll be able to earn more disposable income. And freedom of competition, and also competition's good because it means that the more people trying to provide something, then there's some incentive for people to try to make an even better product or provide an even better service, because then you'll get more customers than if you just provide a shoddy service or a shoddy product, right? And of course, one of the big ideas in capitalism is this idea of laissez-faire, and that it's French, loosely translated means autonomy. So in pure capitalism, we believe that supply and demand will regulate the economy. So if demand goes up, supply will go up. If demand goes down, supply goes down, right? That's the idea of pure capitalism. Of course, we know it doesn't always work that way, but that's capitalism. And again, the argument is capitalism is good because it encourages people to produce better products or better services. It encourages people, particularly now in the technological age, to introduce new technologies which make our lives better. Of course, it expands markets, right? So something that wasn't available for sale in all parts of the U.S. probably are now. And of course, the idea is it encourages efficiency, because remember, people who are producing a good or a service, they want to maximize their profit. And so one way to do that is to become very efficient at what you're doing. All right, now two other systems that we often talk about or hear about are socialism and communism. These terms are often used interchangeably, but they're not. They're not, you shouldn't use them interchangeably because they are not the same thing. So first off, socialism is this idea that there should be collective ownership of the means of production. That is, that for the most important resources within the society, those should be collectively owned and then collectively distributed. Now, in modern socialism, the idea is the government controls the most important resources and then makes certain that those resources are distributed in a way that benefits everybody. But that the government doesn't actually own the resources, the government is just regulating the resources and regulating the economy. Communism, on the other hand, is the idea that there's no private property. Because under a socialist system, you can still have private property. You can still have a home. You can still have a car. But things such as, whatever resources are out, whether it's coal or oil or agriculture or water, wind energy, whatever those resources are, those are collectively owned. And that's what the government regulates, and that's what the government distributes and tries to make sure everybody gets enough of what they need. With communism, there's no private ownership. Right? There's not, you don't own your own house, the government owns the house. You don't own your own car, the government owns the car. It is what some people would call an extreme form of socialism, but I don't even think of it as socialism because it isn't socialism. It's no private ownership, government owns everything, and if you work for the government. And at least in theory, there aren't any class distinctions. Everybody's equal. Everybody's on the same social class, in the same social class. And that's not true with socialism. Okay, so countries that we typically call communist today are actually socialist countries. For example, China is a socialist country because there is private property in China. There are many wealthy Chinese entrepreneurs. It could be said that there was a point in time when China was communist during the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and even going through the 70s. But by the 80s, even China was starting to recognize, maybe we need to allow people to create businesses because the economy is stagnant and all these other countries are so much further ahead of us than we are in terms of technology, etc. And here's the reality about the United States. The reality is that not just the United States, but most countries have what economists call a mixed economy, which means that there's a little bit of this and there's a little bit of this. And typically the little bit of this and this is a little bit of capitalism and a little bit of socialism. The United States is a mixed economy. Yes, it's largely based on capitalism. Excuse me. It's largely based on capitalism. However, we do have some socialist aspects as part of our economy. So, for example, if you think about things such as Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or Section 8 housing or TANF and WIC, what people typically think, or General Relief, what people typically think of as welfare. These are all parts of socialism. Or when we think about agricultural subsidies, where the government gives farmers money either to not grow a crop or because the crop that they had went bad. Those are all part of socialism because the government is essentially saying, look, we recognize that you don't have this resource, and so we're going to give you some of that resource. All right, so mixed economies. All right, I'm going to go here to an idea of Karl Marx. Karl Marx, and remember I've mentioned this before, he was writing during much of the Industrial Revolution in Europe. And so remember that I talked before about how he was critical of capitalism because he thought that it was a root of a lot of the problems that he was seeing in Europe at the time. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise then that Karl Marx talked about what he described as alienation, of people who were working in factories and mills, because it was very rote work, meaning work that was boring and repetitive, and the modern worker, again for his time, and even I would argue sometimes today, the modern worker, somebody working in a textile mill or a factory, etc., they didn't really have any sense of satisfaction that they had done anything of any value or of any worth. These people, and there's a picture there you can see, these are individuals who are just sitting at a station and they're doing the same thing over and over and over again. Because one of the things that happened on a hugely large scale was mechanization. And it wasn't just machines helping to do the work, but it was also this idea of splitting tasks up so that one person is only doing one thing, and when they do only that one thing, they become really, really good at it. So what Marx argued was that a lot of workers no longer had any connection to the work that they were doing, or any connection to the product that they were creating, because they might not even see the whole product or even be able to afford that product. They might just be putting one thing together, and then it would go off to another person, and eventually down the line it would be completed. For Marx, he considered that to be alienation, when you don't have a sense of purpose to your work. You don't have a sense of fulfillment, or a sense that what you do matters. Because remember that he was born and lived, at least the early part of his life, in societies that were largely agrarian, meaning agricultural. And so people were working their own land, people were producing food that they ate and also that they sold. They were raising farm animals that, again, they used for their own consumption, or sold, and that there was this feeling of accomplishment that you could see when you took in a crop, that you had grown all these bushels of corn or wheat or whatever it might be. Whereas for modern workers, there wasn't that sense of satisfaction, and they didn't own anything of any real value. They were just essentially cogs in the wheel. Also, I want you to consider something that I don't think we call it so much the information revolution anymore, but we did in the 1970s. And that was largely the result of the development of the microchip. And it was a microchip, but it's even smaller today than it was then. The phone that you now have, actually, the phones have started slowly getting bigger again, but the phone that you now have as a mobile device, in the early 90s was a much larger phone. It was almost the size of a brick, not quite as heavy, of course, but it was almost the size of a brick. And only people who had a lot of money typically had them. I'm not talking about a car phone, because that was different, and only wealthy people had those too. But an actual mobile phone that you could, say, put in your briefcase and take with you. And then, of course, because the microchip got better and faster and smaller, the devices we use got better and faster and smaller. The laptop you use today is much, much lighter than the laptops of the mid-1990s. Believe me, I've always had laptops, and they're much, much lighter than they ever were. Or the phone that you use is faster. The download speeds are much faster. Wireless Wi-Fi is faster, because in the old days we had to do dial-up. And so all of this information is accessible to us now in a much, much faster way than it ever has been before. And so in theory, we should all be a lot more informed, because there's so much information that we can obtain very quickly. And of course, it also means that, at least in theory, social institutions became more efficient, because now everything's on a database, right? And so if you forget, like I have it's not an Apple Watch, it's a Fitbit watch, but I have loaded on it my credit card. So if I ever forget my wallet, then as long as a place actually has the tap and go, I can actually buy something just by bringing up the picture of my credit card and then just tapping it on the little thing, and being able to go, and not having to carry a wallet if I don't want to. Okay, so then when we think about how the information revolution has changed, and by the way, we are now in what most economists consider to be a post-industrial America, and other countries are post-industrial as well. To say that a country is post-industrial is simply to say that it is a country where it is a country in which there isn't a whole lot that is produced anymore, but what is produced is technology and ideas. And so that post-industrial country buys large amounts of what it needs, goods, from other countries. And that's certainly true of the United States. We have been buying from other countries large amounts of goods because we just don't make them in the United States anymore. And in a bit, I'll talk about outsourcing, which has grown exponentially, I'd say, in the last 25 years. So in the kind of country that we are today, and that many countries are, what that means is that a lot of workers, they do what is called service work, right? Meaning that they're providing a service to people. And they come into direct contact with people, with either clients or customers, with patients, with students. It is more direct face-to-face work. There are other people, and these people are usually much higher paid, who do what economists call knowledge work. Knowledge work is when people are involved in creating technology or creating concepts or ideas, and working with information. As I said, they're usually, not always, but usually highly educated and much more highly paid. Mark Zuckerberg is an exception. He's highly paid, but he dropped out of college. So, but for most people who are doing knowledge work, they've got degrees, at least one, possibly more, and they're really highly paid because they're working with ideas and knowledge and technology. All right, so let me see. All right, so let's take a look at globalization. Globalization is this idea that the world's economy is no longer, well, the economy of countries are no longer individual. That within the last 20, 25 years, the economy has become global, meaning that what happens in one country will affect the economy in another country. And so there's this increased international trade and exchange of technology, exchange of ideas, and all of that then means that it becomes easy for people to be able to move from one city or one state or even from country to country to be able to work. And in fact, some companies need people to work in other countries to manage their offices or to work in their offices in that country. And so to a lot of people, globalization is a good thing because it's meant that it's opened up international trade and it's opened up the exchange of ideas and technology and breakthroughs in medicine, in science, education, etc. You can look at that on your own time. All right. So as a result of this globalization, what has happened for a lot of large corporations in the United States is that they're able to set up offices or headquarters in other countries, even set up production facilities in other countries, and manufacture their products in those countries, distribute them in those countries, market them in those countries. And in some instances, as we'll see with outsourcing, have them manufactured in another country and then sent back here. Okay, so here's a quick example of this globalization. I think it was back in 2004. Yeah, oh, 2004. In 2004, I went to Peru because I wanted to run the Machu Picchu trail. And so I flew into Lima, the capital, and then of course subsequently to I forgot the town where you take off, but it starts with a C. Anyway, I flew to the smaller colonial town, which is where you typically take the train to start the trails. And so I was in a restaurant, and I like to try the local things when I can. I'm a vegan, so can't try the little hamsters. Yeah, hamsters. Is it They eat guinea pigs. So obviously can't try those, and I couldn't try the pisco sour, which has egg white on it. But I did see something on the menu called Inca Kola, and I asked the wait person about Inca Kola, and I was told that this was the cola that Peruvians um, created. And so I thought, well, I'm going to have one of those because I want to try it. And it tastes pretty good. It tastes like cream soda. And so when I asked for my check, the wait staff person asked me how I liked the cola, and I said, well, it was really pretty good. It tastes like cream soda, something similar to something you can find in the U.S. And I said, but I always like to try the local products because I want to support the country that I'm visiting. And he laughed a little and he said, well, take a look at the label on the bottle because the sodas still come in bottles, not plastic, at least back then. So I picked up the bottle and I turned it to look to see where it was produced. And it was produced in Peru for sure, but it said it was produced by the Coca-Cola Bottling Company. And I looked at him and I said, I thought you said this was a Peruvian drink that the Peruvians created. And he said it is. But Coca-Cola was, trying to sell their cola here, and Peruvians wouldn't drink it because we like our own cola. The tourists drink it, but we don't drink it. And so Coca-Cola decided, well, if we can't compete with Inca Kola, then we'll just buy it. And so they bought it. They bought the company. And now it is bottled by Coca-Cola Bottling Company, which is why you can get it here. Because Coca-Cola brings it here and sells it. You can find it in Peruvian markets here or Peruvian restaurants. So that's just an example of this transnational corporation idea. All right, so I didn't mention outsourcing, and I want to make sure that I focus on that because, again, for many people, they think globalization is great, and other people say, well, there are some downsides to it. And I think there are some downsides, and one of those is outsourcing. Outsourcing is a term that describes when a corporation is able to contract with a factory or even build their factory in another country, typically. A country where the labor is cheaper, the operation costs are cheaper, meaning the taxes are lower and the regulations are more lax. And so by doing so, they can produce that product far cheaper than they could if they were producing it here in the United States. It's even cheaper when you think about the fact that these companies then have to ship the product back to the United States. It's still cheaper for them to do this. So Nike, Adidas, almost every article of clothing you have likely has a label that says it was produced somewhere other than the United States. Okay? In fact, I would say it's difficult to find clothing or shoes that are actually produced in the United States because it is so much more profitable for these transnational corporations to outsource their work. Again, just a quick example of how cheap the labor is in some of these other countries. I was traveling in Vietnam back in 2007, and I happened to be in this small, maybe it was Laos. I don't know. I was in 5 countries in South Asia in 2007 in the summer of that year. And now I'm thinking it might have been Laos. I think it might have been Laos. I was in a small town in Laos, and again, I like to talk to people, learn a little bit about the city that I'm in, etc. And struck up a conversation with somebody at a coffee shop that morning when I was eating my breakfast, and it happened to, the person figured either I was Canadian or American because of the way I was speaking English, and so I fessed up, I'm American. He said, oh, well, there's a Nike factory here. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, it's on the outskirts of town. And I said, oh, I didn't know that. I knew Nike, did outsource their factories, but I didn't know that they were here in Laos. Um, Long story short, he told me that he had some relatives who work in that factory, and asked him how much they got paid. And the shoes are put together piecemeal, which is typically what happens in sweatshops. Um, as I said earlier, to make things more efficient, one part of an item is put together by one person, it's passed down the line, the next thing is put on, et cetera, et cetera. So if we're thinking about a shoe, somebody might sew, the uppers together. Somebody else might sew the sole on. Somebody else might make the eyelets um, for the shoelaces, etc., until you have a finished product. And so I asked them how much they got paid. And he said, and keep in mind this was 2007, this was a while back, he said that on average they were able to make between $1.35 and $1.50 a day. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, $1.35 to $1.50 a day, depending upon which part of the shoe they're putting together, on average. And I thought, man, but Nike charges, I don't know if you can get any Nike shoe for less than 100, pair of shoes for less than $100. Think about how much profit Nike is making off of its shoes. Now, of course, they have to have a lot of profit because they got to pay all the athletes to market the shoes for them. But when Nike has come a long way from the early 1970s when it was a shoe company that was founded by a coach at the University of Oregon in Eugene, because his best runner, Steve Prefontaine, needed a better shoe. And so I personally don't buy Nike products just because of what I know. Um, Maybe buying the other shoes that I buy is not much better, but I don't want to buy Nike products. And don't judge others who do, but given what I know, I just don't feel good about it. So that's outsourcing. And sweatshop, you can find these even in downtown LA in the garment district. Um, just a place where people are paid below average wages. They have very long hours and there are very poor working conditions. I just saw an article in the Washington Post today about a third byproduct of globalization. I'll call it that because I can't say anything more kindly than that. But about um, you've heard of sex trafficking. Well, there is also labor trafficking, where people are told that they will be brought to the United States, and all they have to do is work until their passage to the United States is paid off, their airfare or the boat or however they get here. And then what happens is they never are able to pay that off, and so they have to keep working. And this particular instance was of a marijuana growing operation in Oregon, and they were using trafficked labor. So those and the people who were working there were Hmong, who were from Laos, and they spoke almost no English, and so they had no idea how to get out of this terrible situation they were in. So, all right. I just want to point this out, and then I'll end here. Um, I know this because of how many countries I've been to and talked to so many Europeans who get so much time off, vacation time, and then they get all these holidays, and it's really incredible how much time off other people in other countries get. And so the one that stands out to me, well, not just the one, but several that stand out are Austria, because they have 25 days of vacation day. So if you think about that 5-day work week, that's 5 weeks off. And they get 13 holidays because the red are the holidays. But Norway, Sweden, they also get 5 weeks off. Norway only gets 2 paid holidays, and Sweden doesn't get any, but hey, with 5 weeks off, it's not a bad deal. Spain, Portugal, 22 vacation days and 13 paid holidays. Spain, 22 vacation days, 12 holidays. And then you slowly make your way down to the other end. Canada's closer to us. You only get 10 days off paid vacation. They're our nearest, they're closer to us than the others. And you get 9 paid holidays. But only Japan and the United States give you 10 days of vacation. No holidays, no paid holidays. Now, that's not actually even true because it is not required that, at least according to federal law, it might be it's state law. For example, the state of California, if you work a certain number of days, certain number of hours, you have to have a certain amount of time off. But there are many people who work full time who do not get vacation time. Okay, that's the bottom line. And if they do get some, they don't necessarily get 10 full days. They might start off with only 2 days of vacation time, and then the next year they get another 2 days, and maybe they work up to 10 days, 2 weeks off. But you don't, in a lot of jobs, you don't get the 10 days right from when you start. You have to work up to the 10 days. And either United States or Japan requires employers to pay holiday pay for people whether they work or don't work. So, for example, the 4th of July, my spouse, since we live in Reno, now that we're vaccinated, he's gone to work for Tesla on the weekends. And July 4th weekend, he was told he would have to work. Everybody was told that. But the last minute they canceled it. They were going to close they said, we're going to close the facility, but you either have to take vacation time or you take the time as unpaid. Think about that. A multi-billion-dollar company cannot pay people, or doesn't want to, they will not pay people for the 4th of July. Okay, that makes me not want to buy a Tesla car. Well, not that I was going to buy one anyway, but anyway. All right, that's it for chapter 10.